The call came late, just as I was settling in for the evening. "Mr. Haynes, correct?" a curt voice asked. "We've got a short-term assignment for you. Night watchman for the old Granville Research Facility. Just a few nights. Pays double your usual rate." I hesitated. I'd heard rumors about that place, about the accident that shut it down 5 years ago. But rent was due and I couldn't afford to be superstitious. "I'll take it," I said, jotting down the details. The facility was an imposing structure, a relic of 1970s brutalist architecture that loomed over the surrounding forest like a tombstone. The forest's skeletal trees clawed at the sky, their gnarled branches whispering in the cold wind. I parked my car and stared up at the building. Its windows were dark, and a single flickering light above the entrance gave the place a lifeless air. Inside, the air was stale and metallic, with a faint, acrid odor I couldn't place. The lobby was cavernous, its polished floors and high ceilings amplifying every sound. My footsteps echoed as I made my way to the security office, a cramped room with a desk, a few monitors, and a dusty chair. A stack of old security logs lay on one side of the desk, but I ignored them. My job was to patrol and keep an eye on the cameras, not dig through the past. The first round of my patrol was uneventful, though the facility's emptiness was oppressive. Hallways stretched into shadows, lined with doors that seemed to watch me. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, their flickering giving everything a sickly pallor. As I walked, I passed strange signs, scorch marks on the walls, deep scratches on metal doors, and a section of the floor in one corridor that felt soft underfoot, as though the concrete itself had grown tired. At 11:30, I returned to the security office to find a note on the desk. My heart skipped a beat. I was sure it hadn't been there before. In spidery handwriting it read, "They're still here. Don't open the doors." I turned in a slow circle, scanning the room. But I was alone, or so I thought. By midnight, the cameras began glitching. At first, it was subtle, just a flicker of static on the feed from the east wing. But as I stared, I saw something. A blur, almost humanoid, darting across the frame. I rubbed my eyes, chalking it up to fatigue. Then came the noise. It was faint, a soft tapping sound that grew louder and more insistent. It echoed down the hall, emanating from a direction I couldn't place. I checked the monitors again. Every hallway was empty. My hand hovered over the phone, debating whether to call someone, anyone, but I stopped. I didn't want to be the guard who cried wolf. I decided to investigate. The tapping seemed to lead me toward the east wing. This part of the building felt different. The air was colder, the shadows deeper, and the walls seemed to close in. Halfway down the corridor, I found a door that wasn't on my map. It was marked Lab 3. The door was chained shut, the links rusted but thick. As I approached, the tapping stopped. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment I thought I saw something move behind the small, reinforced glass window in the door. Just a trick of the light, I told myself. A voice called my name. It was faint, barely above a whisper, but unmistakable. My blood turned to ice. I swung the flashlight beam around, but the corridor was empty. Returning to the security office, I tried to shake off the feeling that I wasn't alone. The air felt heavier now, and my skin prickled with the sensation of being watched. I sat at the desk, staring at the monitors, but my focus was shattered by another note. This one was on the keyboard, written in the same spidery hand as the first. "It knows you're here. Stay out of the basement." My pulse thundered in my ears. I hadn't left my desk long enough for anyone to sneak in. Every logical explanation I could muster crumbled under the weight of that creeping dread. The radio crackled, breaking the silence. Through the static came faint whispers, garbled and unintelligible, but they grew louder until they formed words. Leave, or it will find you. I shut the radio off, my hands trembling. My heart told me to run, to abandon this cursed building and never look back. But the part of me that needed answers kept me rooted in place, staring at the monitors and waiting for the next sign of something I could barely comprehend. The air in the security office grew stifling, oppressive, as though the walls were inching closer with every passing second. The monitors were now utterly useless, flickering between static and warped, unrecognizable shapes. I considered leaving, but something held me back. A mix of morbid curiosity and the gnawing feeling that running wouldn't save me. The whispers started again, faint but distinct, echoing down the hall outside the security office. I strained to make out the words, but they were layered over each other, overlapping in a cacophony of despair. Then, like a knife cutting through the noise, I heard a voice, clear and sharp, but impossibly familiar. It was my voice. Come here. I froze, a cold sweat breaking across my skin. The voice came from the East Wing, the same direction as Lab 3. I glanced at the note still sitting on the desk. It knows you're here. Stay out of the basement. My instincts screamed to lock myself in and wait until dawn, but some invisible force drew me to the hallway. I armed myself with the only weapon I could find, a heavy flashlight, and stepped into the shadows. The journey back to the East Wing felt like stepping into another world. The air grew colder with each step, my breath forming small, ghostly clouds. The corridor stretched unnaturally long, the doors on either side seeming to multiply, their numbers impossible to keep track of. The buzzing of the fluorescent lights overhead became a distant hum, replaced by the rhythmic pounding of my heartbeat. When I reached Lab 3, the chains were gone. The door hung slightly ajar, revealing only darkness within. I pushed the door open cautiously, my flashlight cutting a narrow beam through the void. Inside, the room was a warped reflection of reality. The walls pulsed faintly, their surfaces alive with grotesque shapes that writhed just beneath the surface, like something struggling to break free. A broken containment pod stood at the center, its glass fractured outward as though something had burst from within. The symbols scrawled on the walls seemed to shimmer in the dim light, their patterns twisting in ways that hurt to look at. I stepped closer, drawn by a faint, whispering chant. The voice was no longer just mine. It was a chorus, overlapping versions of myself speaking in tones that alternated between pleading and commanding. Let us in. Before I could react, the door slammed shut behind me. The darkness pressed in, smothering, and the air filled with a low, guttural growl. Then I saw it. A figure emerging from the shadows, impossibly tall, its limbs too long and bent at grotesque angles. Its face, or what should have been a face, was a featureless void, but I felt its gaze pierce through me. It reached for me, and I stumbled backward, barely dodging its grasp. The flashlight slipped from my hand, its beam spinning wildly across the room. The creature recoiled from the light, its form rippling as though struggling to maintain its shape. With no other options, I grabbed a shard of glass from the broken containment pod and swung it wildly. The creature let out a shriek that sounded like metal tearing and lunged again. The lights in the room flickered violently, and I saw a single word appear on the walls, glowing faintly. Run! I didn't need to be told twice. I bolted from Lab 3, slamming the door behind me. My lungs burned as I sprinted down the hallway, but the building felt like it was shifting around me. Corridors twisted into unfamiliar paths, Doors led to places they shouldn't, and the air carried the faint smell of burning plastic. Behind me, the growls and skittering sounds grew louder. The thing wasn't just chasing me, it was toying with me, letting me hear its pursuit, feel the vibrations of its steps, but never quite reaching me. I turned a corner and found myself at the top of a stairwell. My heart sank. The stairs spiraled downward, disappearing into a pitch-black void. The basement. The whispers returned, louder now, but no longer from a single source. They came from all directions, their words incomprehensible but charged with malice. Somewhere deep inside me, I knew the creature wanted me to go down there. I hesitated, clutching the railing, but the sound of shattering glass behind me spurred me forward. I descended, each step echoing in the suffocating silence. The air grew heavier, colder, until every breath felt like swallowing ice. At the bottom, I found a circular chamber lit by a faint, unnatural glow emanating from symbols etched into the walls. In the center of the room was a grotesque altar, its surface slick with a dark, viscous substance that seemed to pulse with life. The creature stood on the far side, its form shifting and flickering like a corrupted video feed. It reached toward the symbols on the walls, its limbs bending in impossible ways as it began to trace them with claw-like fingers. Then I realized the symbols weren't keeping it here. They were holding something else back. The whispers grew deafening, and the air vibrated with an otherworldly energy. I felt a presence behind me, a cold electric sensation that raised every hair on my body. Slowly, I turned. Standing there was me, or something that wore my face, twisted into an expression of utter malevolence. The doppelganger smiled, and I understood its intention with horrifying clarity. "You can leave," it said in my voice, "but only if you take my place." The thing on the other side of the room howled, its void-like face stretching unnaturally as it surged toward me. I stumbled back, my thoughts racing. My only hope was to destroy the symbols and break whatever link bound us all here. I grabbed a rusted pipe from the floor and swung with all my might at the nearest symbol. The room trembled violently, and the creature screeched, its form flickering like a dying flame. The doppelganger lunged for me, but I struck another symbol. A blinding light filled the room, and everything dissolved into chaos. When I opened my eyes, I was lying outside the building, the morning sun casting long shadows over the parking lot. But the whispers, they hadn't stopped. I sat in my car, the engine idling as the Granville Research Facility loomed behind me. The morning sun bathed the building in pale light, but it offered no comfort. The shadows seemed darker, the structure hunched as though watching me leave. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. Every logical part of my brain screamed to drive away and never look back. But the whispers persisted, faint and insidious, curling in the back of my mind like smoke. They weren't coming from the facility anymore. They were coming from me. The rearview mirror caught my eye, and for a brief moment I saw something that wasn't my reflection. A flicker of movement, a face too pale, too thin, grinning back at me. I jerked my head around, but the back seat was empty. I drove home in silence, the road blurring into a haze. The events of the night replayed in my mind on an endless loop. The chains on the door, the grotesque creature, the symbols, and the thing that had worn my face. The way it had spoken, its voice laced with venomous intent. "You can leave, but only if you take my place." Had I really escaped? Or had I just traded one prison for another? When I finally reached my apartment, the world felt wrong, off-kilter, as though the air itself was heavier. My keys jingled too loudly as I unlocked the door, the sound reverberating unnaturally. Inside, everything was as I'd left it, but it didn't feel like home anymore. I collapsed onto the couch, closing my eyes in a futile attempt to silence the whispers. Instead, they grew louder. The words were indistinct, but the cadence was unmistakable. A chant, rhythmic and ancient, promising something I didn't want to understand. Then came the knock. It was soft at first, a faint rapping at my front door. My breath caught in my throat. No one should have been there. The knock came again, louder this time, more insistent. I approached the door cautiously, the floorboards creaking under my weight. My hands shook as I peered through the peephole. Nothing. I exhaled, my relief short-lived. From behind me came a voice. My voice. "You shouldn't have looked." Spinning around, I found myself staring at an empty room. But I knew better now. Empty didn't mean safe.